and welcome to Purposeful Empathy, a show dedicated to conversations with people who want to grow and spread empathy throughout the world.
So welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I'm joined by Ron McCLelland, who is an actor, pastor, and spiritual director. He's a graduate of the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology and Carnegie Mellon University Drama. Ron has worked professionally in theater and university settings as an actor, director, and acting coach, and in local church as a pastor and pastoral care counselor. He has a private practice as a spiritual director, and given his diverse background and unique skill set, he is able to walk alongside others, helping them cultivate and nurture their spiritual life and creative works for cultural transformation. I just love that, and thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And I should say that we're taping this on the Friday following Tuesday's American election. So just to provide some temporal context. Now, we met online as a result of an exchange, a mutual friend of ours, Bill Huseman,
Yes,
who is
Dr. Bill.
Dr. Bill at Sacred Heart University and the co-editor of Gender, Race, and Class in Media, which is a textbook that I use for my PhD. So I have a very strong fondness for his work. He posted, "Can we have empathy for Trump?" And this was preceding the actual election. And there was some back and forth. And I loved some of what you posted. And I said, "Could we be in touch?" And you shared with me a piece that you wrote. And if you'll indulge, I'd love to just read a couple of excerpts to get us started. So you wrote, "Notice that if you set a wax candle outside in the sunlight next to a muddy puddle, the sun will have a different effect on each. It will cause the wax to soften and become more pliable and moldable, but the mud will become hard and brittle. The same sun shines on both, and in time reveals, without a doubt, the true essence of each. So it is with our hearts."
Yes.
Goosebumpy. Then the second thing you do, I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful visual to say something so compelling. Did you want to say something else before I go into the other one? I don't want to cut you off.
No.
Yeah?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. The second thing I wanted to share was loving an enemy or evil person only makes sense when done so through the lens of eternity, a perspective that considers justice not only in this life, but also on the other side of eternity. When looked at through the lens of eternity, we see that loving an enemy is not only a matter of enlightened self-interest, it may also have a transformative effect on the evildoer, revealing the true condition of their heart, resulting in repentance or deserved condemnation. And I feel that picks up on that wax/puddle.
Yes.
So, when I reached out to you to do this episode, I asked the question, what would you want some of the main takeaways to be? And you said that empathy, lament, and solidarity are needed to aid in the healing of America's racial division and trauma.
Yes.
So tell me what your thinking is about all that.
Yeah. Had you asked me that last month or even last week, I would have given a different answer. So it was only last night after reading your request that I decided, given the state of affairs here in America right now. But yes, empathy is something that is sorely needed and lacking in our country right now. However, there is a segment within our country over the last several months. They've really risen to the occasion. And I'm talking right now, to be really direct, about the white population, especially within evangelical churches, which right now is going through a challenging time. But many people have decided to do as much reading and conversation and dialoguing with Black people and other people of color to learn as much as they can. They've been articulating their solidarity, their allyship, if you will. And as a result of listening to our stories, listening to our pain, walking alongside us, there has been a degree of empathy, whether it's simply shared perspective or sympathizing with us emotionally, or real concern where they've chosen to step out and do something. But there's also been a degree of lament, and that's a part of it. In lament, just to clarify, I'm talking about lament in a biblical sense of the Psalms, where the psalmists would cry out to God in pain. They would weep over the injustices that they saw, the injustice that they experienced. They would complain. And as a result, though, they were able to process their grief and oftentimes come out on the other side of it with worship and praise. And then, of course, you get a group of people together who are walking proximity, doing life, empathizing, lamenting together. True empathy will lead to some sort of compassionate action. And that kind of solidarity is needed. But during the election, we were surprised to see that people pretty much voted the same way they did in the previous election, but in greater numbers. And many of those that we thought were allies, or those who we thought had a change of mind, they actually came out in stronger force and doubled down on their decisions. And I guess I'm not sure what that means yet. We'll have to see.
Yeah. There's so much to unpack when you just think just about the election itself and everything that speaks to. But I think there's a sense that, if I don't think it's completely understood by those who voted in favor of Trump a second time, how painful and traumatic that decision was, that really transcends sort of like policy and politics.
Yes. And a lot of that has to do with empathy as well. It's just that they've done a dangerous thing, I believe, where they've empathized with someone who's, I'll be blunt, narcissistically abusive. Mm-hmm. And so they've identified with and empathized with someone who does not return such empathy, who does not emotionally regulate, who doesn't care about others. And as a result, they've strengthened the hand of each other.
Yeah, I saw something on Facebook that for half the electorate, they just want to get out of the abusive relationship they've been in for 4 years, and the other half don't even recognize they're in an abusive relationship yet.
That's so true. That is so true. But isn't that the case, though, even within our homes, our families, our churches, our workplace? We're so familiar with relating a certain way and a certain dynamic within systems. When it's played out on a national stage, it's familiar. Mm-hmm. We don't see anything wrong. It's just normal. It's the way we function anyhow.
Mm-hmm. Can you share a personal story or encounter where you had to walk along someone who acknowledged their racism and lack of empathy toward the other?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay, well, yeah. About 13 years ago, I was working at another church in the Pacific Northwest. And there was this lovely older woman who served in ministry with me. But my being one of the pastors, I had some responsibilities that she had to walk alongside and carry out some of my directives or what have you, which I don't think she cared for as much. But she had a wonderful reputation within the community, well-loved, wonderful disposition. But I experienced her much differently, which is often the case with people of color who are working in white spaces. This was an overwhelmingly predominantly white church, and I was one of the Black pastors there. And I would bring this up with leadership, but it wasn't really, they were kind about it, but pretty dismissive because they know this woman, and it must be my imagination. But one day, this older lady, she approached me and asked if she could speak. I could tell she was very nervous, and she was trembling a little bit, and she wanted to talk to me because she wanted to apologize. And she was very direct. She admitted that she, quote, hated Black people. She was very direct. But she had time to process it. She had said, I've worked with you for 6 months now. I've gotten to know you. And another gentleman who's a friend of mine, she said, I've watched you men. I've interacted with you. I've seen you. And she says, over the past 6 months, I've become so ashamed. I've become so ashamed as I've heard your stories, as I've interacted with you, as I've watched you in action and learned from you, seen you interact. I realize that I have a real problem and I'm the problem. So now I'm listening to this woman who just told me that she hated Black people, but she didn't stop there. She shared all the ways she hated Black people. Everything about their appearances, the thickness of their lips, their nose, and on and on. So now I'm having to listen, and I'm trying to empathize and connect with this person because I can also see that she's in pain. She really is in pain, and she's crying while she says these things. And then she shares her story of being a child, and I don't want to get into the details to expose her, but she was a missionary kid working overseas, and she lived an interesting life, and it played a role in her formative years of shaping her opinion. So I listened, and because I saw that she was not only, we had to empathize with each other, and we had done so over a 6-month span of time. She was in deep lament. She was in deep lament. And she asked me if she and her husband, if I would be willing to meet with them each week for breakfast so that we can continue the discussion, continue the dialogue, which is what we did. We would meet, we'd break bread together, we'd continue the conversation. And as a result, we not only continue to grow in understanding and empathy and grieve each of our stories, but we began to walk alongside each other in the work that we had to do. That's solidarity. And it took great courage on her part to do what she did. But there's also a danger in it for me as well. And there's a danger in empathy.
I was just going to ask about that. Isn't that also exhausting? Isn't that also painful? Yeah. Can you speak to that?
Yes, it is exhausting, but what's exhausting is when you're wrestling with others for validation, when you're wrestling to be seen or heard, but that wasn't what was going on. This person was willing to learn. They were willing to acknowledge. And the danger for whether it's a counselor, a spiritual director, or anyone who's entering into these kinds of discussions is the fact that once you decide to walk alongside someone empathically, what you're saying is, I am going to not only create space for you to practice your presence, which brings a certain degree of lack of safety, but I'm going to actually commit to struggling with you, which means by default, you can't walk with someone and go to those kinds of places, those dark places, and not take on some of the wounds, to take on some of the scars. You're basically saying, I am going to do this for you on your behalf so that you may also be healed. The challenge, though, I found with many of my white colleagues, including those within the church, is that they also are aware that to do such a thing on behalf of Black people means that they must also take on some of the reproach and trauma and rejection, and it exposes their shame, and they're unwilling to go that far. Because they know that it will mean separation.
Separation from
or alienation, their group, their clique, their party, their relationships. They know that to take such a stand, to identify with me, to lament with me, to empathize, to actually open themselves up to so receive my story, means that in the process of my being open and transparent, they're cut open. And they must not only walk alongside me knowing it will bring a response from their group, it also means that their own complicity and shame will be exposed. And many don't have the courage that this old woman should.
Yeah, and especially now in cancel culture, right? Like if you're in the process of learning and unpacking and becoming a better anti-racist ally, you still stumble, right? Myself, I had a conversation with a woman last week. We were at an empathy summit, and an African-American woman, and we weren't able to converse like we are. It was through the chat, like all the participants. I shared with her that I struggle. For example, we had a Black Lives Matter protest on the heels of George Floyd's murder in Montreal, and it was at the beginning of COVID. So there was backlash about people just being out and about, protesting when the COVID pandemic was circulating. And I went out with my mom, who's close to 80, and my daughter, who's 4. And I was very proud to bring my daughter, that's not the only protest we've been to in her short life. And my mom, walking with a cane and a painful hip was weeping, in sort of like in a naive, we didn't have the full understanding of sort of like the discourse around white supremacy and anti-racism, but just crying like, why is this a thing? And I was proud, and I shared on my Facebook page, afterwards, along with a whole whack of other anti-racist resources, and I wrote a blog about it. So like I'm really earnestly trying to unpack and unlearn some stuff too. And I don't know whether or not just a simple thing like posting a photograph where I feel proud of my mom and proud of bringing my daughter, it is performative.
I was going to say that would be the question. Yeah. Right.
So, and I want to unpack that with you. So what is that about? Like, where do you draw the line? Yeah.
Honestly, I don't know if I'm much help there. I personally, my question with hearing you share the story was, okay, I know that there are those who would say, okay, is that primitive or not? But the reality is, at least as I experience, is people, they share important moments. They share meaningful events. And I know personally, I can't get into people's heads and hearts to ask what their motives are. My question would simply be, is that where it stops? Was this simply an act to a bit of virtue signaling? That would be important to me, because those are the kind of questions that I ask myself. But the act of posting it or sharing it in and of itself, me personally, the things like that don't bother me. There's just too many more important things, for me personally. My thing is, hey, they're out there. You're out there. You're doing it. Your family is involved. You're showing up. You're showing up, and you're posting that. What it does is it gives other people permission to show up. It gives others permission to be present. Those who look to you as a leader, who respect you and who admire you, they may be looking for some sign, some symbol, some signal that says it's okay for me to be present as well. Because Anita, she showed up, and she's not afraid. She's not ashamed. So I think it's a good thing personally. As far as people's motives for doing it, it's not mine to judge,
So the anecdote that you shared of that older woman and the breakfast that you shared together is really touching and poignant. And I wonder, what do you think would allow us at a scaled level? How can we do more of that?
Wow. Be honest with you, that is rare. However, I do know that there are people who are looking for groups, who are looking for settings and organizations that are providing the space to do that. Because unlike many Black people, it's like we can't go a day especially if we're out working in the marketplace, where we're not surrounded by white people with whom we have to do. We have to learn your ways. We read your books. We watch your shows. There's a certain degree where I believe it was W.E.B. Du Bois who said, we understand white people much better than they understand us. And that is true. Whereas many whites can go an entire day or a week and never have any meaningful interaction with any Black person if they so chose to do so. Mm-hmm. So for those individuals, they need to find groups and organizations that are providing, whether it's in their church or their civic groups or whatever, or many of these anti-racist organizations that are now, much more in the spotlight. So you find those groups, you find people who are already on the journey or are willing to enter in. And it's in those places that you're able to at least start the process. But is it okay if I share a little bit though on a personal note?
Mm-hmm. Please do.
You can do that institutionally with other organizations. My hope though, my challenge, my invitation though, is that you do take the risk and try to have these conversations with your friends. And I know there's a lot that's out there where, yes, we want you to do the work. We don't want the first few months, for instance, after Floyd's murder, my phone was inundated. I was overwhelmed. I had no more mental, emotional bandwidth with white people who were reaching out to me for help. But over the years, I have had friends that I've suggested they read books. They listen to certain speakers, and they never did. They never did. Even recently, I shared with a friend, okay, did you read this book? And I went through a list of books. No. Well, I started that, but something else came up. So I go through like 5 or 6 books they did not read. It's like, okay, well, what about this show? Did you watch the documentary 13th? What about I Am Not Your Negro? Well, no. All right, so, and I had to explain to them, all right, since my youth, I've read your Shakespeare, I know your Moliere, your Racine. I've listened to Rush Limbaugh just so I can learn. I've watched Fox News. I know your great composers, your Bach, your Beethoven, I went through the list. I know all these things, and some of it I wasn't necessarily interested in, but I was either forced to or as an artist drawn to it. And over these years, you haven't found the time to read one recommended book that would give you some insight into how we think, how we feel, how we came to be in the situation that we are in. So I would encourage, our white friends and family and relatives to start there. Read a book. Read a book. Listen to a speaker who's of a different race than yours, and from a different culture. Take some time and do life with some people that you may be uncomfortable with. Start there at the very least.
Such an important message. It makes me think of, I watched Cory Booker asking questions to the new Chief Justice.
Yes.
And it was in the same sort of vein as what you're saying. And she's, a lawmaker, and she has not looked at some of these circumstances that has made the criminal justice system so unjust.
Yeah. How can you empathize with us if you're not even curious enough to hear our stories, our perspectives?
From a spiritual practice, what would you suggest to right now to find the empathy, to find the lament, to find the solidarity? What can we do as a spiritual practice to continue doing our best to love people we don't understand, don't like, dislike, don't trust?
Yeah, that's a excellent question. Again, I think we have to circle back on some things I think we already talked about. It's this idea of proximity. We're going to fear or hate that which we fear and don't understand. And I think right now a lot of white people are afraid of blacks, but blacks are afraid of the system. We're afraid and concerned about white supremacy. And so as far as loving our enemy, I would suggest, and this is tough, and I'm not popular for this, but I do believe in this concept of walking in the opposite spirit in a very simple way, in that we don't have to respond to every personal attack. We don't have to respond to every personal affront. I think when we're dealing with this concept of empathy, and I'm bringing it all back to empathy because it's easier to just focus on that, because that's a big question. But, it's hard to separate what's an offense and what is that which really causes harm. And I think differentiating between those two is one step, that some things are really harmful and we must stand up, we must fight. But a part of showing love, though, is not showing offense, as Jesus taught. One aspect of love is not holding someone's offense against them. And I know that's an easier thing to say than do when we're dealing with such serious issues. But in our day-to-day interactions, it's easy to respond to offenses while people are trying to work through these issues. They're trying to figure it out. They're trying to sort through some things. So extending the grace and learning that you love an ordinary fool differently than maybe an enemy, and that fool may simply be foolish. They may not be a danger to you, but you love them differently than your normal everyday sinner as well. So I'm just saying extend grace, encourage people to read, to listen, to watch all these documentaries that's out there, and then find a group of anti-racists who are actually doing the work, submit to them, learn from them, and let them lead.
Ron,
Cool
I'm really
beans.
super grateful to you. Really.
Well,
Wish you a
thank
good
you.
Friday evening and nice weekend. I hope we stay
Thank
in
you.
touch.
Thank you. Oh, yes, we will. Thank you. Goodbye now.
Bye.